So, off the cuff, I'm just going to say thank you, Senator Wiener, for joining us. And then I'm going to ask you quickly, what's the best district in San Francisco, and why is
the best district is the entire city. It's all. I mean, obviously, I have always lived in District 8, and I represented District 8. And that is home to me, but we have amazing neighborhoods across the city.
Very diplomatic. Okay, so you've set a goal of 8 million units of housing over the next decade if you're elected to Congress. What federal policy or policies can be enacted to unlock that huge number of homes?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for taking the time. And we do have a severe housing shortage, not just in California, but in many parts of the country. And increasingly, the history of the U.S. is a history of mobility, of people being able to move around and say, there's opportunity in this other part of the country or in this other state, and so we're gonna go and move there. It is a national problem, it's not just California. And so we have set a goal of 8 million homes, with a generational investment of $1.2 trillion, $120 billion a year, to be paid for by scaling back the Bush and Trump tax cuts, which have cost us tens of trillions of dollars, I think over $10 trillion. And we want to do this in a few ways. First, to create and implement a social housing program, which we've talked about a lot in this country, but have never really done it, except for a few local jurisdictions that have. They have this in Europe, in parts of Asia, where it's mixed income housing, where you pay rent based on your income. And so it's not the old style public housing where we have housing just for poor people. We want everyone to be able to live together and be able to afford rent. And then that funding will be tied to good land use and permitting policies. We don't want to put funding into cities that will then take 10 years to do anything with the money. So that is part of it. We also want to pay cities for housing that has been built. $10,000 per home actually built in that city. And that would be a brand new idea that I'm advocating, because right now we see so many cities, not all, but many, that say, hey, housing is a burden. It's going to be a burden on our schools or a burden on our infrastructure. Housing is never a burden. Housing is a benefit for communities, but that tension creates resistance. And so we say we're going to give you money, not for permitting homes, but for homes that are built. That will help reduce that tension. And then we need to unlock the lending market for multi-unit construction, which is a broken market in this country, by providing low-cost loans. It could be via Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, but to make sure that there is lending available. And then finally, we need to stabilize and grow our skilled construction workforce. We have a boom-bust construction workforce. Every time there's a downturn, they get laid off. And then when we have an upturn, we don't have enough construction workers. And so we need the federal government to help what we call counter-cyclical spending. When you go into a downturn, you spend more to keep the construction workers employed building housing, but also building all the other infrastructure we so desperately need: water systems, transportation systems, climate resilience, and make sure that we are really stabilizing this workforce so we can build what we need. So those are a few ideas we have.
You have unfortunately touched on most of the questions I had. So take each of these as an opportunity to speak more about the individual elements of the policies that you've outlined there. So critics of legislation that you've authored in Sacramento have suggested that there's not enough attention being paid to affordable housing, subsidized affordable housing in the laws that are being passed. The unit costs of this type of housing in San Francisco, for example, can be like $1 to $1.5 million per door. How can the federal government unlock or help scale that kind of housing?
Yeah, I have no critics. Everyone loves everything. If you have no critics, it means you're not doing anything. So the housing work that I'm a proponent of. We need to build every kind of housing: subsidized, market rate, ADU, senior housing, student housing, everything. And I think one of the worst parts of our housing debate, and there's so many bad parts of the debate, is pitting different kinds of housing against each other. Say, no, we should only have market rate, the government should have no role. No, we should only have subsidized housing, the private sector should have no role. And it's just to me, it's a very problematic. It's very problematic to start pitting housing against each other. We need all of it. The hole is that deep. And even though there are some who say, well, Wiener only cares about market rate, that's not true. If you look at the work I've done, it has dramatically helped the construction of below market rate affordable housing. So one of the laws that was mentioned, SB 35, and its successor, SB 423, has resulted in nearly 5,000 below market rate homes built just in San Francisco, tens of thousands across the state. We're starting to see this law now produce more mixed income housing in San Francisco, which is fantastic. But for years, it was only producing below market rate housing. I passed a law to allow religious institutions and nonprofit colleges to build 100% affordable housing on their land. There's a lot of churches in particular with a lot of excess land, and to rezone it and make it really easy for them to do that. And then we have delivered billions and billions and billions of dollars in funding for affordable housing, and that has gone a bunch of that right here in San Francisco with state funding helping these projects get built. We do need to lower the cost of construction. It is a big problem. And so expediting the process is a big part of that. When you get your permit in 3 months instead of like 5 years, that is a huge savings. Because of the lack of workforce, that increases the cost, so increasing the workforce will lower it. And we need to bring the construction industry into the 21st century. A lot of the techniques are the same as they were 100 years ago. So when we legalized cross-laminated timber for high rises, that was the big step. Modular and other newer or newish technologies can play a big role. It's great that the Elizabeth Warren wrote the Housing Act, deals with the chassis issue for mobile homes. And so we need to just break out of some of these strict construction rules that increase the cost, because it should not cost $1 million to build a home.
Okay, you referred to the 21st Century Road to Housing Act. It streamlines federal environmental reviews for urban infill, encourages local governments to build more housing. What's your opinion of that act? What would you like to see? I mean, any issues with it?
I think it's fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And I know that the thing that's become most controversial about it is investor-owned single-family homes. And in California, that is honestly not a real issue. It's a tiny percentage of single-family homes that are owned by investors. I don't think completely banning any investor-owned housing makes sense. Like we have with apartment buildings, it's very common. I don't want to see single-family homes get overwhelmed with investors. It's also the case we've always had a very meaningful percentage of single-family homes in California are renter occupied. It's been that way for a long time, and we should have availability of rentals, but we want to make sure that people can actually have home ownership. So I think having some limits on that makes sense. We can debate about what the right threshold should be, and I know that is probably the most controversial part of the act. And so I'm sure that'll get worked out.
Okay, quick technical intermission here. Can you put that on the table? Yeah. Thank you. You referenced social housing. It's part of your agenda. Can you speak more about how that differs from what people traditionally think of as projects and the negative connotations of those? And in the context of federal housing, 44% cut to HUD's budget, how do you plan to build political support for the level of public investment that you're pitching?
Sure. So the federal government used to play a huge role in housing, and then in the late 70s and then under Ronald Reagan, a lot of that was taken away, particularly investment in public housing. And so they built a lot of public housing. There are always challenges when you have income segregation. Mixed income communities are, I think, typically just healthier and lift people up more. And so there were some challenges, and then once the federal investment evaporated, it was left to local communities to fund the housing, and we started seeing deterioration of the public housing stock, and we've seen it here in San Francisco. If you ever went down to the Sunnydale projects before everything was sort of taken down, and not all of it's been taken down, it is it's sort of extraordinary. I think a lot of people in San Francisco don't fully appreciate how everyone lives in this city. And so that is being replaced by beautiful new housing, just like Valencia Gardens. When I first moved to the Castro in 1997, I remember Valencia Gardens was a really not the best living environment for people. It got torn down, replaced by absolutely, I think, beautiful mixed income housing. And that's the direction we should go. And also having like good design and good public space, and just ensuring that people can just live good lives and raise their families and be able to afford housing. So social housing is different. First, it would be more of a public-private partnership, and it could be a partnership with a nonprofit, it could be with a for-profit, but the government would be involved and helping with the funding, and there would be requirements around, people would pay no more than typically 30% of their income on rent. And so it would require ongoing public subsidy depending on the mix, but it's, I think, a very beneficial form of housing.
So I think probably the biggest challenge at the federal level is...
Oh, and I didn't answer the second question. This regime is such a shit show on so many levels. And so, yes, they went after HUD and started gutting, excuse my language, it's okay if I curse a little bit. So, right, good. I cursed in the last debate, and I got politely taken to task, and then one of my opponents cursed as well, so that made it better. I wasn't the only one, at least. It's just a disaster, and yes, HUD, they have tried to gut HUD, but they've done it to like so many agencies. And so we're gonna have enormous work to do once we get these psychos out of office, and that's not a swear word, that is just a noun that describes people. Once we get them out of office, we have to rebuild, and rebuilding government capacity so that, because people can't have faith in government if all the government agencies are like Night of the Living Dead, right? Because they've all been gutted. So we're gonna have to rebuild that capacity, and that includes HUD. HUD plays such an essential role. Housing is a national issue. HUD is not like a nice to have, it's a must have. And so we need to rebuild it. And there are probably some things that can be, as in a number of these agencies, when you're building back, you want to build back better than before. And not to borrow the name of the law that became the Inflation Reduction Act, we should make the agencies even better. And so under Trump, it's going to be hard. And especially when Republicans, they're basically all been bullied into never supporting a tax increase. But so at the beginning, we're going to almost certainly, very likely, have the House, hopefully the Senate too, and we're going to have leverage, and we can start using that leverage for reversing healthcare cuts to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act, and science cuts and so on and so forth. And housing should be on that list to try to use leverage to reverse those cuts. But then once we get them out, we can start really building to have a brighter housing future.
So touching on that last point, assuming that the Democrats retake the House and the Senate, they may not have the ability to reach cloture in the Senate with the number of senators that they have. So I imagine there will still be some coalition building required, working with people across the aisle. How would you go about building that coalition for housing amongst two parties that neither one of them have really expressed much interest in housing up until maybe this most recent act.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is on housing, there actually is a possibility, as Elizabeth Warren and Tim Scott showed, as I've shown over and over again, working with colleagues from both sides of the aisle. And I know which Republicans in both houses are the real housing cheerleaders, and so I engage them early, work with them, and they help bring along some other Republicans while I'm working on various Democrats who might be a little bit in the middle on these issues. And so this is where being in a legislative body, when you're in a legislative body, I don't care how dynamic you are, I don't care how much money you have, you are one out of a group. I was one out of 11 here, then I became one out of 120 in Sacramento, and then I'll be one out of 535 in DC. And so you don't do anything by yourself. You can't write a $5 million check and just get it done. That's not how it works there. You do that in an election, you can't do that as a member of a legislative body. You have to build relationships with your colleagues, including the colleagues that you have strong disagreements with, right? And you need to have those relationships, including colleagues who drive you crazy because they're taking positions. You're like, how could you think that? And you find common ground. Okay, we really disagree on these issues, but there's these two issues over here, mental health and housing, that we agree on. So let's find ways to work together. And so that means getting to know your colleagues, and that takes a lot of work, and understanding what's important to them, and what's important to their district, and then finding those bridges. And I'm not naive, I know it's hard. It's not an easy atmosphere, particularly now, things are so polarized, but there are so many issues that are not polarized. Housing is one, mental health is another one. When I've done a lot of work around forcing insurance companies to cover more mental health, and that's battling with these massive corporations who they don't want to cover much mental health or addiction treatment. And so we did this huge bill we passed it, and California now has the strongest mental health insurance coverage law in the country. You need to take that national too. And one of the reasons that we were able we just creamed the industry in the end. And the reason that we creamed them instead of just barely winning is that early on, I found out that the Republican leader in the assembly was passionate about this issue, and she came to me and said, I want to help. And so she was my partner in the assembly, and it freaked out. When people first saw that she was the one who was going to manage my bill on the assembly floor, it broke so many brains in the Capitol. And ultimately, once that happened, it was over for the industry. It was over. And so you have to figure that out. And that takes legislative skill and finesse, and not just coming in and saying, I'm going to barrel through and just pronounce what we're going to do.
As a state senator, you have focused a lot of your legislative work on streamlining the production of housing with, reduction of barriers from a regulatory standpoint. People call that deregulation. Why do you think this is so important versus other factors?
Yeah. I don't call it deregulation. I call it the correct level of regulation. Because sometimes this debate, and this is true not just in housing, in a lot of different areas, it's either you have to be one over the top, the most extreme regulation possible, or no regulation. And that's not what the debate should be. It's what is the right level? I don't think we should get rid of zoning, but should we have zoning only for single family homes near a BART station? No. Should San Francisco have super low density zoning in one of the most economically productive places in the country? No. And we can debate, should it be 4 stories or 6 stories or 8 stories, or some people might want 20 stories. Those are all fair debates, but that's still zoning, and it's a debate about what level. And so even SB 79, where we said we're going to have zoning for more density near high quality transit, we still had heights in there. We didn't say you could build a 10,000 story building. And even with the the permit streamlining work we've done, there are still, it still has to meet the zoning. There are still environmental protections in there. And so it's really about just the correct level of regulation, because what we have done in California in particular, but elsewhere as well, is the level of regulation on housing is so, at least was, where it's getting better, was so over the top, so extreme, that it strangled our ability to build enough homes. And that's why it is so expensive in so many parts of California, because for 50 years we made it progressively harder and harder, and we way over-regulated. And so we're just, in my view, right-sizing the regulation.
In the housing crisis that we're facing right now, renters are particularly vulnerable to losing their homes because eviction doesn't just mean losing their housing, it may mean losing their place in our communities in the Bay Area entirely. What renter protections do you support, and what role does the federal government have to play in this space?
Yeah, I think it's really important. And when I first moved to San Francisco, and I've told this story before, so forgive me if you've heard it before. I arrived, I was this, young gay guy, just, doing my gay thing in San Francisco. and I arrived and I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna sign a lease and find an apartment. Like, that's how I had done it before in Philadelphia, which is where I lived before I moved here. It was like boom, just sign a lease for $550 big 1-bedroom in like one of the coolest parts of Center City, Philadelphia. And I come out here and I went to the first open house. It was actually in the Haight, and there was a line down the block and people were trying to bribe the landlord. And I was like, what on earth is happening here? And I was very lucky that I knew someone who knew a landlord, and so I got a place. And so I was a baby lawyer, started practicing law, and I was at a firm that allowed us to do a lot of pro bono work, and so I chose to do low-income renter eviction defense. And so one of my first cases was with this older gentleman. He was probably in his 70s, an older gay man, long-term HIV survivor. This is 1997. So this guy had probably lost so much of his community. He was, he had HIV, and it was only 2 years before that they actually had developed treatment to make it not a death sentence. And so this guy had survived, and here he was in San Francisco where he had lived for decades. And he came to me through a clinic where we picked up the case because he was facing an owner move-in eviction. It was a no-fault eviction, and there are owner move-in evictions. There are some that are legit and there's some that are fraudulent. And his seemed particularly sketchy. And I remember when I did my intake interview with him, he said to me, if I lose this apartment, I have a choice. I can either go back to, I forget which state, but to the south, where I'm from, and live with my family, and have stable housing, and have really bad HIV care. Or I can stay in San Francisco and have world-class, the best possible HIV care at Ward 86, San Francisco General, and be homeless. That's my choice. And this was just months after I moved here, and it just, my heart just sank, because I saw me. I saw me. This is a guy from the generation that had made space for people like me to be able to exist in the world. Ultimately, we got him if I recall correctly, a very, very sizable payment. There was no way in the end to be able to defend the case because the laws were not what they needed to be. But it's just tragic to hear anyone talk like that. I've always been a supporter of San Francisco's rent stabilization law, and I've supported various enhancements to it. I supported the statewide rent cap that we enacted during the pandemic that David Chu authored. And I do think it's important to stabilize renters in their homes. Just like we need to stabilize homeowners when we had the foreclosure crisis. It is not it's bad for them and it's bad for society when people are losing their homes. And the federal government does have a role to play, I think, particularly with Section 8, to make sure that people are able to pay the rent and that we don't have discrimination against Section 8 voucher holders. And that's a critical piece of the puzzle.
That story touched on the possibility of homelessness. We've reached a record level of homelessness in the country, 770,000 people approximately. About 1 out of every 4 people who are unhoused in California. Beyond housing supply, what specific interventions would you pursue to reduce unsheltered homelessness?
Yeah, and last I checked, we have a majority of unsheltered homeless in California. And the thing with homeless, and the debates about like the demographics of the homeless population make me a little crazy because it becomes very politicized with people saying, oh, the only thing we need to deal with homelessness is mental health and addiction. Well, of course we need to deal with mental health and addiction, but an awful lot of homeless people do not have behavioral health issues, or some of them, if they do, it's because they're homeless. It would cause problems for pretty much anyone in that situation. And we know that so many homeless people, if they have a place to live, they will thrive. There are at a minimum 2,500 homeless students at San Francisco Unified. And that's probably an undercount. There are school districts in California where it's about 5% in San Francisco. There are school districts in California where it's more like 10% or more. It's a moral failure. And so, yes, we need a good shelter system so people can have that immediate ability to get off the streets, but we have to have more transitional housing for people where people can quickly be housed in a place that might not be permanent, but at least is going to stabilize them, and then have permanent supportive housing, but ultimately just have enough housing, period, that people can actually access it, whether it's subsidized below market rate or market rate. In California, the last statistics I saw were that about 90% of low-income Californians live in market rate housing. And that's why we have to be building everything across the spectrum. But we need to have a real emphasis on housing for our lowest income residents to try to get folks off the streets. And then for those who do have behavioral health challenges, putting someone into housing is not enough because they will still have challenges, and we have to make sure we have that support as well. But anyone who says that building housing is not a key part of the solution to homelessness has a bridge to sell you.
Okay, we're going to move into some questions from the audience. The first is, how would you address the problems that a lack of financing cause for housing production? I talked about the 1.2 trillion over 10 years to go towards social housing, towards the payments to cities to incentivize them to make it easier to build housing, and for Section 8, increase to the Section 8 voucher program. So that's a big one. Also, unsticking the lending market, as I mentioned, perhaps through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, to provide lower cost housing. And also continuing to make sure that we're reducing some of the process and delay costs. And so streamlining is part of that, and the federal government should, again, this new funding needs to be conditioned on having good streamlined permit processes. And throw it in there, we got to deal with PG&E. And this is a battle that I've been fighting for so long. I've been trying to turn them into a public utility and allow San Francisco to break away for a very long time. It's why they always oppose my elections to everything, which is fine. But the other piece of it is so often we learn of particularly affordable housing where they're told, okay, you're built, everything's done, we'll turn the lights on in 9 months or a year. And that is unacceptable. It's just, and I tried to pursue legislation to put a 45-day time limit on them. It got killed. It's so hard to pass anything in the legislature if PG&E and its union oppose you on it, but we keep trying.
It also drives away businesses, because when they tell a business, we'll turn your lights on in 18 months, that business is like, they're out off to Texas. So it's a big, big problem.
Who in Congress has been good on housing, and why do you think so?
There are a number of people who've been good on housing. I mean, obviously, I've mentioned some of the senators, and I've also developed a relationship with Senator Brian Schatz, from Hawaii, who actually had me come out to Hawaii to meet with like their state, like elected leaders and governor staff on housing, which was great. Robert Garcia from Long Beach, who founded the YIMBY caucus. I got to know him when he was mayor of Long Beach. We had a whole group of big city mayors, which are more organized now, who are super pro-housing, and they counterbalance the League of Cities, which tends to represent smaller, more suburban cities. So he was one of the big city mayors who was super pro-housing. He's now in Congress, founded the YIMBY caucus. He now is the ranking member of House Oversight Committee, so he has a lot on his plate there, but he's great on housing. Jake Auchincloss from Massachusetts, who I've gotten to know really well, and who is just fantastic, not just on housing, but all sorts of permit reform. He reached out to me a few years ago saying, hey, I saw your work on housing. I was on the city council. I know your pain, and I want to work together. So he's great. Across the aisle, and I don't know if he's still going to be in Congress because his district got blown up by Prop 50 and he's now running as a declined state. But Kevin Kiley, who's a very conservative Republican from the Sacramento area, he was in the legislature with me, and very conservative. We had like 10,000 disagreements. He was great on housing, and he would help. And there's at least one Senate Bill 9, the duplex law, allowing by right a duplex or fourplex. That bill would be dead without him. It was about to die in a committee, and he made sure it got out of that committee. So there are a number of different people who, Laura Friedman from Los Angeles, my former colleague, represents like the Glendale, Burbank area. She's fantastic on housing, and I'm really excited to work with her again.
Okay, there's a lot of buzz.
And Scott Peters from San Diego. So there's a lot of them. It's good.
There's been a lot of buzz about innovative construction techniques. You referenced cross-laminated timber, including Assembly Member Buffy Wick's bill package. Which of these bills are you most excited about for its ability to reduce costs and increase supply?
I think the work to try to make modular more of a thing. It's very limited now, and it needs to go to scale, and it's going to require help to do that. So that's something that I think is very, very exciting. If we can really get that industry to go to scale and have a skilled workforce that is doing that work, to me that is very exciting. We also have to deal with impact fees and local exactions. And I'm not against impact fees, but it is so all over the map, and because we make it so hard for cities to raise taxes in California, that development fees are the easiest way for them to generate revenue, and so not surprisingly that's what they do. But when you put it all together, it can be crushing. And then when people say, why are we only building like low income and luxury housing, that's like part of the explanation. That's what pencils.
Okay, bear with me. This is a long one. We often try to convince cities to improve housing policy by making funding contingent on better behavior. As a congressperson, how will you balance the need to bring home money for the district with the carrots and sticks you want to use to convince SF and other cities to adopt better housing policy?
Yeah, I mean, it's always, to me, a little complicated when you talk about conditioning funding or taking funding away based on like housing policies. Because some people say you should take away their transit money or this money. I'm like, well, that sometimes you take money away and it hurts like the people who are not at fault, like especially like lower income people who are not the ones that have captured the city council and are preventing housing. And so there are some cities who'd be like, fine, take away our money. We don't care. Like, we don't good. We don't have to build the housing. And so it's very, I try to be really careful with that. So to me, it's more about new funding, and I'm much more comfortable conditioning that on having good land use policies. And it has to be significant funding. You can't say, oh, we're going to do like a little grant program here if you just like change all your housing policies. Because then the wealthy cities will be like, great, bye, we don't need the money. But if you make it a really significant amount of money, a lot of cities are going to be very, very hesitant to give up that money. And I think that's why the $10,000 per home built, when you add that up, if they're building a bunch of homes year in and year out, that's going to be a lot of money. And so if you do it at that scale, I think it can be really effective.
What's a great city for housing in the United States? And if you can think of an international example as well.
I think some of the cities that come to mind that have really built a lot of housing, like obviously Austin gets cited a lot. They really took it seriously, and housing costs are a lot better there. Washington D.C. I think really built a lot of housing, and even though housing is not cheap there, I think it's a much more affordable place for people to live. I think Chicago, at least in parts of it, has taken it seriously. So I think that there are cities that I think have done the right thing. I mean, internationally, I think it's just, when you go to Asia, it's just a different mindset about how you approach these things. So, you have, like in Tokyo or Hong Kong, where the transit system is also in charge of all the land around it, and so they zone for dense housing and for commercial, and it ends up funding the system. And so that's why when you go to Taipei or Hong Kong or Tokyo, it's whatever, $1 to ride an immaculate subway system where the trains come every minute, and that is just different than here. And in Tokyo, in Japan, buildings they're around for a while and they get torn down and replaced, and whereas we fall in love not just with the straight up historic buildings, which we should fall in love with the straight up historic buildings, but then a lot of buildings that are really not historic, but they've been around a while, so everyone gets attached to them, and it makes it harder to do some of the things other countries do.
All right, for the last question, I'm going to pivot back to one of ours. The primary opponents in this race are Supervisor Connie Chan and Shoykat Chakrabarty, who has also promised a fairly sizable federal investment in housing. Because we need to make a choice in voting in this primary, how do your policies differ from theirs?
Yeah, I mean, well, in terms of Supervisor Chan, there's very stark policy differences. She, opposed the mayor's family zoning plan. She helped kill the Stevenson Street project. That was the 500 units, 500 homes at a valet parking lot right by BART station. And so she has just in general been very oppositional to making it easier to build new homes. She killed the 38 Geary rapid bus project that would have made the 38 Geary more like the 49 Van Ness, which is now so fast that I sometimes miss my stop because I didn't realize it was coming up. So of course, when you actually make these transit investments, it really, and 49 Van Ness ridership is now way above pre-pandemic as a result. And so the 38 Geary is not just any old bus line, it is the highest ridership bus line west of the Mississippi. And we had the opportunity to turn it into a Van Ness style, physically separated rapid bus line. That is exactly the kind of project we should be putting all over the place, and Supervisor Chan did kill that project. And she opposed car-free JFK and Sunset Dunes, and she wants to put cars back on the Sunset Dunes. I went a little bit beyond housing, but transit and public spaces are connected to housing. In terms of Shoykat, he says many things, right? There's a lot of statements and positions and detailed policy positions and videos and podcast appearances. And a lot of the stuff he says, a lot of things he says I agree with. But they're statements, and he has never demonstrated, even remotely, an ability to turn any of those statements or ideas into actual policy, into law, into reality. And that, it's easy to make statements. It's much harder to turn it into policy. And he's never been in a position of like leadership or as a policymaker. Never had to cast a vote. He spent 6 months as a staffer on Capitol Hill, and so it's not enough just to have be able to say good ideas. You have to show that you can deliver it, and I'm the only candidate in the race who's shown that, not just on housing, but on healthcare, on climate, on corporate accountability, and so forth.
Okay, thank you very much, Senator Wiener. Thank you everyone for coming out.